Well, good morning, Michelle.
Good morning, Stephen.
You've been writing prodigiously in the conversation this week. I can't keep up with you, in fact. But can we start with the reported tension between Julie Bishop, the Foreign Minister, and Peter Credlin, Tony Abbott's Chief of Staff? You say today, Abbott, perennially under fire for not having more females in Cabinet, now finds himself the man in the middle of two formidable women. He has to be loyal to Bishop. He wants to be loyal to Credlin. He describes his Chief of Staff as the fiercest political warrior I've ever worked with. Now, Michelle, you'd be good at this kind of thing. What would you advise him to do?
Well, look, I think it is a very difficult situation for him. I think that around the ministry there's been a lot of talk for a long time that Peter Credlin is running too much, is having too much influence with the Prime Minister, is stopping access. And Julie Bishop, in a way, has brought this to a head by making it known that she's not going to be pushed around by the Prime Minister's staff. She's in a very strong position at the moment. She's Deputy Liberal Leader, but apart from that, she's done very well. So she's crystallised this criticism, essentially. And it is a difficult situation for Abbott to handle because he clearly totally values Peter Credlin's advice. He's not going to cut her loose, and yet I think he has to somehow seem to be less under her sway. And a lot of this is probably up to her. She's supposed to be the really good tactician. Well, she should now apply some of that judgment to how she handles that position. I think she's got to be a less obvious presence publicly, and she has to treat ministers with a bit more deference and respect. They are really quite sensitive to these things, and if they feel that they can't get proper access to the Prime Minister, or that the Prime Minister is being unduly influenced by others and not by them, they'll react.
Well, it's one to watch. Going back earlier in the week, the Medicare co-payment change of plan, the revised proposal, seems actually similar to the higher education reforms technique: cut the funds to the supplier and effectively force them to charge back the patient or the student, or they go without. So is it going to work?
I think it has more chance of surviving in the Senate than the original proposal, because some of the rough edges have been knocked off from the consumer's point of view, and also some of it is being done by regulation, which, although it can be knocked out by the Senate, the votes are a bit more lenient from the government's point of view. But it still has to win Senate support, and that's not a done deal yet. There'll be a lot of talking over the next couple of months on that question with the crossbenchers. Now, the doctors don't like it, won't like it, but they are in a more difficult position. They'd argued for vulnerable people to be exempted. That has now been done. Pensioners and other concessional patients are not subject to the co-payment, and it's more difficult for doctors to say, well, look, this proposal puts a squeeze on our incomes, which it does. That's where the savings are coming, and this saves almost as much as the original proposal, but it's harder for them to run that in the public domain. So I think that the government has pitched it quite well and has a reasonable chance of getting what it wants, perhaps with a bit of more finessing.
But in terms of public opinion, it's still going to hit the majority of the population?
Yes, it is, and I think that the government will still be vulnerable politically, but it's taken so much damage already that now it's just looking for the money, I think, rather than too much public support. But it will be more acceptable than it was because of these removal of the vulnerable people.
And then finally, Michelle, overnight we've had a strong signal that the Prime Minister would like Aboriginal recognition in the Constitution to go to a referendum in 2017 to coincide perhaps with the 50th anniversary of iconic amendments in 1967. You and I have talked about recognition before. Is it a clever tactic to put it beyond the next election and not get it tangled up in an election campaign, but not too far away so as to look as if it's being pushed aside?
I think it's certainly important not to get it tangled in an election campaign, because then you get maximum conflict, partisanship, bitterness generally, and also the leaders are not going to put their backs into a referendum proposal. They're trying to win an election. Now, many people would have liked this referendum this term, and I think ideally Tony Abbott would have probably liked it this term, but frankly, given his position, would he have a hope of winning a referendum this term? I doubt it. And he hasn't even got a question yet. He was making it clear last night that the questions that have been put up by the parliamentary committee he believes are not satisfactory. More work will have to be done by that committee, by the government, on an acceptable question. That is really the first big hurdle for this referendum. But also, of course, he has to try to walk this line between the Conservatives, some of his own base, who say, we don't want any change to the Constitution, and the Aboriginal community, many of whom say, well, anything that's not really robust is not acceptable. So there are many steps ahead before this has a chance of passing, and he doesn't want to go into a vote unless there is a fair prospect of winning.
Well, Michelle, one more of these discussions this year and then we can fall in a heap. So I look forward to talking to you again next week.
Thanks, Stephen.